Welcome back to All About Winning Daily Fantasy Sports. My name is Ty Patton. In this video, I will share my research and strategy to identify the running backs I will be targeting in Week 11. Before we unpack Week 11, let's take a quick look back at Week 10. The top 5 projected running backs in Week 10 were as follows: Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, Mack from Indianapolis, Alvin Kamara, and Chubb from Cleveland. The actual top 5 scoring running backs were as follows: Derrick Henry from Tennessee, 36.10 points. Christian McCaffrey, 29.10 points. Aaron Jones, 27.3 fantasy points. Ronald Jones from Tampa Bay, 23.6 points. And Joe Mixon from Cincinnati with 20.10 points. The actual total ownership for the top 5 running backs was as follows. These were the top 5 as far as ownership. David Montgomery, and I fell into this trap last week due to his salary and the matchup. But David Montgomery led the way with 37.64% ownership. Christian McCaffrey was next with 25.32% ownership, even though he had a salary of $10,500. Singletary from Buffalo, 23.38% ownership. Mack, 16.75% ownership. And Ronald Jones from Tampa Bay, 16.28% ownership. These top 5 running backs averaged 23 touches. They had an average score of 27.24 fantasy points, which equals out to 1.18 fantasy points per touch. As I've stated previously, I try to use 3 running backs by focusing on using a running back in the flex position. I'm aiming to get 65 or more touches between those 3 running backs to get me where I want to be as far as my lineup and value. I try not to use a wide receiver in the flex because it's hard enough getting 3 wide receivers right, the right correlation, let alone getting 4. Now on Draftkings, sometimes it makes a little bit more sense to get a wide receiver in there because it's PPR, but I really do try to get the running backs, and I focus, as I said, on getting 65 or more touches. When I research the running back position, I want to focus on a few categories. They are as follows: touches, snap percentages, fantasy points per game, and the individual matchup. Excuse me. I've developed this chart you see here on the screen for you to use as a visual. I used to do my videos and provide a lot of numbers, a lot of the same numbers that I'll give you here, but it was kind of hard to follow along and keep track and correlate and all that. This gives you a visual to follow along, and these are the categories that I use to identify the running backs that I'm going to target. And real quick, over here, the salary, obviously from top to bottom. Now, one other thing I want to mention, the color codes, obviously red is the worst, yellow is middle of the road, and green is the best in comparison to the rest for that particular category. Now, obviously, Christian McCaffrey's not a bad running back. It's the salary. So the color is correlated in relation to the other areas in that particular category in comparison to. So I have touches per game in this category. I have fantasy points scored per game in this category. Right beside that, opponent's fantasy points allowed per game to that position. The opponent's rank versus that position. Their snap percentage. How much are they on the field for their team? Their total red zone touches. Now this is total red zone carries and total red zone targets combined. And the last category is a number that I use. It's fantasy points per snap, with all things relevant, whether they carry the ball or get a target or a reception. This is just being on the field. What is their points per snap? Like, for instance, Christian McCaffrey's one of the highest, second highest on this slate with 0.501. So a half a point per snap, which is really high. And obviously, Dalvin Cook is the highest right here, 0.535 fantasy points per touch. So with that being said, these are the running backs that I'm targeting, and I'll break it down why. If you want to follow along with me, I encourage you to screenshot this, pause the video, use it however you like, and use it to help you build your fantasy lineups. Over here to the far left, obviously, is the name of the running backs. As I mentioned, green is best. Now, you'll see I have some in yellow. I'm kind of on the fence with those, and I'm not really sure. I'll put them in the player pool for now, and then when I do lineup building on Saturday, it'll be either a yay or nay. So there's a lot of things that I'm considering, like ownership and other things, and I'll let you know when we do the lineup building. I got Matt Breida in red down here. He's questionable, and have a little bit of interest. I have Coleman in green. Obviously, I have more interest in Coleman if Breida is out. So that's the only player that I have in red. So getting back to the task at hand, these are the running backs I'm targeting and why. Christian McCaffrey, do I really have to explain it? He's 10,500, which it makes it difficult to get up to him. And to get value with him, you're looking at getting at least 31 fantasy points, which he's averaging 32.3 fantasy points per game. This is a good matchup. Atlanta is real stingy against the run. However, they do have trouble with running backs that catch a lot of passes out of the backfield, which is a lot of what Christian McCaffrey does. Christian McCaffrey can be considered as a wide receiver one and a running back. And so you're getting kind of two players or two positions for the price of one. That's how I look at it when I use him. I will have some exposure to him. I learned my lesson back about midway through the year. I faded him totally, and I believe it was the game that he went off for 51 points. And basically, if you didn't have any shares of him, and I believe the other player was Godwin from Tampa Bay, wide receiver, if you didn't have one or both, you were pretty much out of luck that weekend. But McCaffrey, he's going to have high ownership. As I said, he's getting 25.88 touches per game, second most on this slate, second only to Marlon Mack. He's scoring 32.3 fantasy points per game, which is the highest on this slate. He's getting 93% of the snaps. He doesn't share snaps with anybody. He's not part of any committee. He's not game script dependent. Win, lose, or draw, he's on the field, and he's got a high percentage of their overall offense. He's had 38 total red zone carries and touches. He's averaging 0.501 fantasy points per snap. And like I said, the only downfall is this salary, and they've got it to where it's almost to the point where it's much higher, and it's going to be hard to get value with him. I still think he's viable to use at this price, but going in, I just know that I need 30 points to get value with him. Next, Ezekiel Elliott, $1,500 savings off of McCaffrey. He's getting 22.67 touches per game. He's averaging 19.3 fantasy points per game. Detroit is allowing 32 fantasy points per game to the running back position. They rank number 31 versus the running back position. Elliott's getting 82% of the snaps. He only shares a few carries with Pollard, and just to give him a break. And lately, he's just been getting an unbelievable amount of touches. They're not throwing the ball to him as much as they did last year, and hopefully they turn that around. He's had 45 total red zone carries and touches. He's averaging 0.336 fantasy points per snap, which is just kind of, middle of the road. He's not getting the touchdowns that he has in the past few years. This 9,000, you're looking at getting close to 30 points, but the matchup is really enticing when Detroit gives up a lot to the running back position. Now, last week, they are the team that I attacked with David Montgomery from the Bears. Didn't end up that well. I think Montgomery ended up with 6 fantasy points. Ezekiel Elliott's a lot better than David Montgomery, much better offensive line. This game's in Detroit indoors, fast track. And I think I like Ezekiel Elliott more if Matt Stafford's out. If Stafford's in, I can see Detroit moving the ball through the air because they really don't have a running game. Their running game is throwing the ball to, well, now it'll be McKissick out of the backfield. That's going to be their running game. But if Stafford's out, which I'm thinking that he's probably going to be, this changes the dynamics of the game. The game does have a 47-point over under, and I just I have a lot of interest in Zeke because of the price. Be interested to see what his ownership is, and I'll address that tomorrow when we do the lineup building video. Next up is Dalvin Cook. He's $8,900, getting 24.3 fantasy or 24.3 touches per game. He's averaging 25.6 fantasy points per game. Now, Denver's only given up 23.7 fantasy points per game to the running back, and they're number 12 versus the running back position. He's getting 71% of the snaps. He's had 36 total red zone carries and touches. He averages the most fantasy points per snap of all running backs on this slate at .535. This sets up real interesting because he's the do-all running back. 8,900 is nice, $1,600 savings off of McCaffrey. They're a large home favorite with a low total, which makes you believe that. And Denver's really tough to move the ball on through the air. So this is setting up nicely for a Dalvin Cook game. They give him the ball a ton. The only thing I don't like about Cook is the fact that they do spell him a lot with Madison. Madison's getting some carries. And you can see down here, Madison's actually had 22 red zone carries and touches. So that worries me a little bit. I'll probably have some shares, not crazy about the price. It is the savings off of McCaffrey. But Cook will have some really high ownership, which will probably have me look elsewhere this week. I don't think there's going to be many lineups that have McCaffrey and Cook in them that I'm going to worry about. But he does provide a nice floor for fantasy points. Next up, Alvin Kamara, 7,400. I have him in yellow. I'm on the fence with Kamara, mainly because Tampa Bay is very stingy against the run. Kamara catches a lot of passes out of the backfield and getting 21.83 touches per game, scoring 18 fantasy points per game. As I mentioned, Tampa Bay, they're number 2 versus the running back position. Kamara scoring .371 fantasy points per snap. He's had 16 total red zone carries and targets. 51% snap percentage. Remember, he did miss some games, and that snap percentage is reflected by overall plays this season. And they have a lot of integral parts with New Orleans. He hasn't had that really big ceiling game this year. In Tampa Bay, this is the second highest total on the board. I believe that Tampa Bay is going to be able to score some points. It's in Tampa Bay, and he could be sneaky. His price will probably cause his ownership to be a little bit inflated when you look at the running backs ahead of him. The only thing with him is he is part of a committee, but he's really efficient. He doesn't need a lot to get to those fantasy points. And like I said, he hasn't really had that ceiling game this year, which is what a concern of mine is. They are coming off a loss, so look for better focus by the Saints this week. Next up, Le'Veon Bell. I've rode Bell a few weeks. Thought he was in some really good smash spots. He's 7,200 this week, which means he's got to get about 23 fantasy points for value, low value. He's getting 20.78 touches per game. His opponent this week, the Washington's giving up 28 fantasy points per game to the running back position. They're ranked number 26 DVP versus the running back. He's getting 89% of the snaps, and he's definitely not part of any running back committee. They don't target him that much. Last week, I believe he had 4 targets out of the backfield. He's definitely not being used like he was in Pittsburgh. He's averaged 0.267 fantasy points per snap, which is really low. He's had 16 total red zone carries and targets. They're just not utilizing him like Pittsburgh did. He's only scoring 15.1 fantasy points per game, which is what scares me with that $7,200. Now the matchup is really enticing, and if they ever decide that this is going to be a Le'Veon Bell game, we're going to give it to him, throw it to him, and do everything they can, he can break a slate. But the Jets haven't done that this year, so be very interesting with the matchup. And with Haskins at quarterback, I see a situation where could possibly be some turnovers and a shorter field, so maybe this will be the week for Bell to put together a really nice fantasy game. Excuse me. Next up, Josh Jacobs, 6,900. Jacobs is one of my favorites this week on the slate. Cincinnati is number 30 versus the running back position. They're giving up 30 points per game to the running back. Jacobs is averaging 17.7 fantasy points per game to the running back. He's getting 20.22 touches per game. He's had 34 total red zone carries and targets. He's averaging 0.492 fantasy points per snap. I really like Jacobs. I like that home. They're a large favorite, which I think that point spread's kind of interesting. 10.5 points. I know Cincinnati's horrible. I actually feel like this game will be closer, which makes me like Jacobs even more because they like to just give the ball to Jacobs. That's what they want to do. They want to run the ball. He's not. He's got a 57% snap percentage. Sometimes he can be phased out a little bit if they get behind. They like to throw the ball to Richards out of the backfield, and he's missed some time in game times due to some injuries, had a shoulder concern. But I really like Jacobs. I will have a large share of him this week. I'll be interested to see what his ownership is. But the matchup with Cincinnati, they switched quarterbacks and all that didn't do anything to their defense. And Lamar Jackson had his way running the ball against Cincinnati last week. It was from the quarterback position, but it's still the running game. So I definitely will have a larger share of Jacobs. I'll probably be a little bit higher than the rest of the field for Jacobs. After Jacobs is Tevin Coleman. He's 6,100. He's getting 15.14 touches per game. He's only averaging 14.7 fantasy points per game. Arizona's giving up 26.1 fantasy points per game to the running back position. They're number 20 DVP versus the running back. He's had 25 total red zone carries and targets. He's scoring 0.419 fantasy points per snap. I like Coleman more if Breida is out. And this is setting up real nice. Arizona is a little bit better against the run, and but running backs out of the backfield is definitely an Achilles heel for them. And Coleman's proved a few weeks ago versus Carolina, he really took over that game. Very, very efficient. I mean, he's only getting 15.14 touches per game, but he does a lot with what he gets. He's had a couple down games. That's a nice salary actually at 6,100, and might be a nice pivot off of some higher owned running backs. San Francisco wants to run the ball. That's what they want to do. They want to run the ball and beat you with defense. And if Breida's out, and those carries are going to go somewhere, it's going to be Coleman. It's Mostert will probably get a few shares, but I think it'll be something along the lines of 80-20. And they like to throw the ball to Coleman out of the backfield. um, um, which is the way that they used him in Atlanta as well. So I have a lot of interest in him at 6,100. Next up is Singletary, and playing the Miami Dolphins. Um, few weeks that's been the thing. You play the players against the Dolphins. Singletary's only 6,000. He's getting 10.5 touches per game. He's scoring 12.5 fantasy points per game. Miami's giving up 30.3 fantasy points per game to the running back position, second highest on the slate. They're number 27 DVP versus the running back. He's got a 37% snap percentage, but remember he missed some game times. And some game time. He's only had 9 red zone carries and targets. He's scoring .335 fantasy points per snap, which tells me he's really efficient. Thing with Singletary is, and that's the guy down here on the bottom, Frank Gore. They like to get near the end zone. They like to give the ball to old man Gore. So 6,000 is kind of scary. That price, you're looking at getting 18 fantasy points to get value, and with his average in that committee, I normally avoid running backs in committees, but I do consider them when they have the nice juicy matchups like this one, Miami, and I think that I'll have some shares of him. I'm still on the fence with him. That's why I have him marked in yellow, but I do have some interest in Devin Singletary. Next up, Joe Mixon, $5,500. He's getting 16.89 touches per game. He's only averaging 11.1 fantasy points per game. Oakland's giving up 26.1 fantasy points per game to the running back position. They're number 22 DVP versus the running back. He's had 22 total red zone carries and targets. He's got a pretty low fantasy points per snap average of .283. He had 32 touches last week, 30 carries in that game versus Baltimore with a new quarterback under center, Ryan Finley. Mixon, though, in that game, it didn't matter what the game flow was or how the game was going. I mean, they were getting blown out, and they were still giving the ball to Mixon. And a lot of 2 turnovers that turned into touchdowns turned that game. They were just manhandled by Baltimore. But he's 5,500 and he's the featured back. He's getting the target, or he's getting the touches, and he's getting some of the targets. They do bring Giovanni Bernard in and to spell him some, especially on third down and catch passes. But this could set up really nice for Mixon, and with the new rookie quarterback under center. This is his first road game. Of course, the home game didn't go well, so the road game was kind of scary as well. It seems like they might have a renewed focus on getting Mixon the ball. And 5,500, if he smashes that, you won't see him that low again. So, and it's not doesn't take much to get value on that. You're looking at about 17 fantasy points to get minimum value, and I'll have some shares of him. So that, like I said, I like to use 3 running backs, with 1 in the flex, and he's going to be one that I probably get into my flex spot some, so I can spend up in a couple other areas. Talked about Matt Breida being questionable. He's 5,000. He is getting 13.89 touches per game, scoring 11 fantasy points per game. Arizona's giving up 26.1 fantasy points per game to the running back. They're number 20 DVP versus the running back position. He is scoring .437 fantasy points per snap, but the problem with Breida is Coleman. If Breida's in, I probably won't have Coleman or Breida. They use them both, and I don't want to have a running back committee on my DFS lineup. It's just my preference. You got to get the one it's hard enough to build a lineup, and then if you're going to pick between 2 running backs and they get down there and Breida's carrying it between the 20s and then Coleman's carrying it, on the goal line, you just never know. It is a nice price at 5,000, but I'm thinking they're leaning towards him being out, which will make me have more interest in Coleman. Next up is Brian Hill. He's going to be super chalky for Atlanta. He's 4,800. He's the Jalen Samuels that we had a few weeks ago, the free spot, what they call, with Devontae Freeman out. He's getting 6.2 touches per game. This is primarily based on, uh, coming off the bench, obviously. He's averaging 9.2 fantasy points per game. But Carolina's given up 29.6 fantasy points per game to the running back position. They're number 28 versus the running back. They're definitely it's more difficult to move the ball in Carolina through the air than it is on the ground. He's averaging .404 fantasy points per snap. He's going to be, because of that 4,800, he's going to be super, super chalky. I mean, featured running back getting all the carries. But I don't think this game sets up for. I think Carolina's going to be able to score on Atlanta. So, I mean, Brian Hill is going to be, if he's going to be used, he's going to be catching passes out of the backfield. And I just don't think it's a game where he's going to get a real high volume. And he's super chalky. I'll have some shares of him, but I'm not going to be on him. Like he's going to have a really high ownership. I'm just not. My preference is to go and pivot to some other spots, spend up maybe a little bit more and get up to Mixon or something like that. I just don't like the game script for this game, and but the matchup versus the way to move the ball on Carolina is on the ground. But if you fall behind and or you're on the road, it just sets up to be a nice letdown. But it's hard to pass up that 4,800 and the free spot that you get with Hill. Next up, J.D. McKissick. He is 4,600. He's the new running back by default in Detroit. The thing about McKissick that makes him interesting is his specialty, catching passes out of the backfield, is a good thing on a Draftkings DFS lineup. He is only getting 5.44 touches per game, scoring 6.2 fantasy points per game. But remember, he's mainly come off the bench this year with Kerryon Johnson out, Ty Johnson banged up. You see him on the field a lot, and if they get behind, the game script is pretty enticing. And I will probably have more shares of McKissick than I will Hill, because I feel like Dallas gets a lead on Detroit, and they're throwing the ball all over the place. Driscoll threw, I believe, 46 passes last week, a ton of passes, and the backup quarterbacks tend to drop the ball off to the tight end and the check down running back, so he could rack up a lot of points just through the passing game. Dallas has given up 26.5 fantasy points per game to the running back, number 21 DVP versus the running back position. McKissick has a .318 fantasy points per snap. He's had 4 total red zone carries and targets. So I'll have some shares of him. I'm going to watch the ownership between him and Hill. I'm pretty sure he'll have higher ownership, but I will definitely be using McKissick in some of my lineups. Last and certainly not least, and I talked about him when I talked about Singletary, is Frank Gore. He's $4,400. He is getting 13.22 touches per game. He's scoring an average of 8.1 fantasy points per game. Miami's given up 30.3 fantasy points to the running back position. They have a number 27 DVP versus the running back. He's 46% snap percentage. He's had 17 total red zone carries and targets. A really low .265 fantasy points per snap. I really only have interest in Gore or Singletary if one of them's out, but I put them on here just because it's hard to ignore the matchup versus Miami. And like I said, early on through the season, that's been the thing, is play the players against Miami. And I don't believe Miami is going to be able to move the ball and make this game very competitive. Buffalo has a really stingy defense coming off a tough loss in Cleveland. I just don't think Miami has the parts um, to compete with Buffalo. The thing is, if they have a lead, who are they going to lean on? Are they going to split it 50-50? You know, Singletary has a 37% snap percentage and Gore has 46%. So, you know, it's pretty close to 50-50. And I just don't have any interest in um, running back committees. One thing about Gore, though, coming back to Miami, this is a revenge game for him. Um, but for me, I've never really had um, much interest or luck playing into narratives. With the running back position, I also like to target running backs in games that are, I like the running backs for the games that are small home favorites. I also consider ownership to gain leverage, which we will look at during the lineup building video. As I mentioned, I do try to stay clear of the running back committees, and that's one reason I know Cook is the workhorse for Minnesota. It still worries me with Madison there. He's getting some goal line carries and actually fell into the end zone last week and got called back for a penalty or fell just short. And then the very next play they brought Cook in, but that was a touchdown that Madison could actually had. So you can't discount Cook because of committee, but I really like the running backs who have the high snap percentage and getting the bulk of the touches. And I look at the red zone. You know, are they competing with anybody in the red zone? And that's how I um, build my lineups. And obviously looking for value as well. So summing up the running back position, if you look over to the left, we have Christian McCaffrey, Ezekiel Elliott, Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara. I'm kind of on the fence with him. That's why he's in yellow. Le'Veon Bell, Josh Jacobs, Tevin Coleman, Devin Singletary, Joe Mixon. Matt Breida is questionable. If Breida's in, I will probably remove Coleman, and I just won't have any shares of that. Brian Hill, McKissick, and Frank Gore, they are all on the fence for me. I want to thank you guys for joining me. I encourage you to post any comments or opinions below. It really helps me out if you share this video, like it, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you get notified when my next video posts. You can also follow me on Twitter at winningabout. I'll be coming back shortly with the wide receiver video, and then we'll do tight end defense special teams, and we'll put this all together and build some winning lineups, do some optimized lineups tomorrow. Again, I'll see you real soon. My name is Ty Patton. This is all about winning daily fantasy sports. Take care and have a good evening.